The ballroom glittered that night, bathed in golden light from chandeliers that seemed to drip diamonds. Waiters and servers moved like shadows across the room, their uniforms crisp, their steps measured, weaving carefully through clusters of men in tailored tuxedos and women in gowns worth more than a year's rent. The wealthy laughed too loudly, their voices mingling with the clink of champagne flutes and the occasional tinkling of silver against porcelain. To anyone watching, it looked like a flawless gathering of the city's elite. Another gala for charity that masked opulence with shallow generosity. Jordan moved among them like he belonged to another world altogether, carried himself with a kind of quiet grace, balancing trays effortlessly, his dark eyes scanning the room with precision. His uniform was the same as the other server's white shirt, black vest and bow tie, but he wore it differently. While others hunched under the weight of trays, Jordan's back was straight, his steps sure, his movements smooth. To some, it made him stand out, though not always in a good way. More than one guest looked at him too long, as though searching for something to fault. They never found anything, but their gazes lingered all the same. Jordan didn't pay them much attention. He was used to this world, polished exteriors, fake smiles, and the assumption that because he was there to serve, he had no story worth knowing. They didn't know that music had once been his life, that he had spent years studying piano, composing, dreaming of filling concert halls instead of carrying canopsies. They didn't know that his hands, which now held trays steady, had once danced across ivory keys with the kind of genius that turned heads and opened doors. But doors could close just as quickly, especially for someone like him, someone who hadn't been born into privilege. Opportunities dried up, bills piled high, and dreams had to wait when life demanded survival first. So here he was, another invisible face in a world that applauded only itself. Near the edge of the ballroom, sleek black piano gleamed under the chandelier's light, untouched all night. It stood as a piece of decoration more than an instrument, a symbol of luxury rather than artistry. Most guests didn't even glance at it, but Jordan's eyes flickered toward it every now and then, almost without realizing it, like a man glancing at an old photograph tucked in his pocket. The longing was there, even if buried beneath layers of composure. As he passed a group near the piano, the sound of a woman's sharp laughter caught his ear. She was draped in jewels, her hair perfectly coiffed, her every movement calculated. To show off wealth, a cluster of her friends leaned in, feeding off her energy. When her eyes locked on Jordan, they lit up with a mischievous spark. "You there?" she called, her voice carrying just enough to cut through the chatter around her. The guests nearby turned slightly, curiosity pricked by her tone. Jordan paused, tray balanced on one hand, waiting for her request. He expected the usual more champagne, another plate of food, maybe directions to the restroom. But instead, her lips curled into a smirk. She gestured casually toward the piano, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "Why don't you play us something? Surely you know your way around a piano." Her friends erupted into laughter, the cruel kind that didn't mask its intent. It wasn't an invitation, it was a joke, a jab at the idea that the waiter standing before them could do anything but serve. Jordan stood still, his expression unreadable. He could feel eyes on him now, more than just hers. Guests nearby turned their attention toward the exchange, curious to see how he would react. For the woman and her circle, this was amusement, a little game to remind everyone who had power in the room and who didn't. But Jordan didn't flinch. He set the tray down gently on the nearest table, the glasses clinking softly as he released them. His movements were deliberate, calm, and without hesitation. Then, without a word, he turned toward the piano. The laughter faltered slightly, confusion flickering across the woman's face. Her smirk twitched, uncertain whether he was playing along with her joke or daring to defy her intent. Either way, all eyes followed him now as he crossed the short distance to the instrument. The piano, untouched all evening, seemed to awaken as Jordan approached. He pulled the bench out slowly, sat down, and adjusted his posture with the kind of ease that comes only from years of practice. His fingers hovered above the keys for a moment, and in that silence, the room seemed to hold its breath. The woman raised her glass to her lips, feigning nonchalance, but her eyes were fixed on him. Around her, whispers began to ripple, speculation buzzing like static. Would he actually play? Did he even know how? Jordan closed his eyes briefly, drawing in a quiet breath. In that moment, the noise of the ballroom faded. He wasn't a waiter. Anymore wasn't invisible. He was the boy who had fallen in love with music before he could even spell the word. He was the teenager who had practiced until his fingers ached. The young man who had played in competitions where every note mattered. Though life had pulled him away from it, the piano was still in him, waiting. His fingers pressed down, and the first chord rang out. It was not timid, not uncertain. It was bold, resonant, a sound that cut cleanly through the air like a declaration. The laughter stopped instantly. Conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned, eyes widened. Jordan's hands began to move, weaving melody and harmony with the precision of a master, each note flowing seamlessly into the next. The ballroom transformed in an instant, the chatter replaced with music that seemed to swell from the walls themselves. Those who had mocked him moments ago now stood frozen, their expressions shifting from amusement to disbelief. Woman's smirk vanished completely, her glass lowering slowly, as though she'd forgotten she was holding it. Her friends stared, their laughter caught in their throats, unable to reconcile the man they had dismissed with the brilliance before. Them. Jordan's playing wasn't just technical, it was alive. His music told stories, painted pictures, pulled emotions from the deepest corners of the heart. It was joy and sorrow, triumph and loss, woven together in a tapestry of sound that no one in that ballroom could ignore. Even the waitstaff paused. In their work, trays held mid-air as they turned to watch one of their own command the room in a way none of the wealthy guests ever could. The chandeliers above seemed to shimmer in rhythm with the music. And for the first time all evening, the ballroom felt honest. No masks, no facades, just the undeniable truth of talent that demanded respect. Jordan never once looked at the woman who had mocked him. He didn't need to. His music was the answer, more cutting than any words, more powerful than any retort, and as he played, the crowd leaned closer, drawn in as though under a spell. Some felt their throats tighten unexpectedly, tears prickling their eyes without warning. Others stood in stunned silence, their mouths slightly open, as though witnessing something they couldn't quite explain. The piano, which had been little, more than decoration, was now the heart of the room. And Jordan, the man they had overlooked, was its pulse. By the time his fingers began to slow, the tension in the room had shifted completely. The cruel laughter that had started it all was gone, replaced by a silence so heavy it bordered on reverence. Jordan let the last note linger, holding the moment in the air before it dissolved into stillness. He lifted his hands from the keys. The room still hushed, as though no one dared to breathe. It was in that silence, more than the music itself, that the truth landed hardest. The joke had turned on the joker. The man they had mocked wasn't just a waiter, it was something far greater, and now every person in the room knew it. The last note hung in the air like a breath that no one dared release. For a heartbeat, the entire ballroom was utterly still, no glasses clinking, no chatter, no laughter. It was as if Jordan's music had pressed pause on the entire evening. And then, almost like thunder breaking after a long silence, applause erupted. It wasn't polite applause, not the kind people gave out of obligation at charity events. It was loud, raw, and insistent. Echoing off the marble walls and vibrating beneath the chandeliers, the guests who had moments ago been smirking or looking away now clapped until their palms stung. Some even whistled. The energy in the room had shifted dramatically, pulled completely away from the wealthy woman who had instigated the cruel joke. People pressed forward toward the piano, their curiosity overpowering their usual restraint. A man in a tuxedo leaned over to his companion and whispered, not quietly enough, "Who is he? Where did they find him?" The companion, equally dazzled, simply shook her head and murmured, "He doesn't look like just a waiter." Jordan sat there for a moment, his hands resting gently on his lap, his expression calm. Inside, he felt the familiar swell of release that always came after performing. But he didn't bask in the applause. He wasn't doing it for them. He had played because the piano had called to him, because the music inside him couldn't be ignored. He stood slowly, offering only a modest nod of acknowledgement before starting to move back toward the tray he had set down earlier. But the crowd wasn't ready to let him disappear again. "Encore!" someone shouted. Another voice quickly followed. "Play something else." A ripple of agreement surged through the guests, their voices overlapping, pleading for more. A woman near the front clutched her husband's arm, her eyes wet with tears she couldn't explain. "It's been years since I've heard anyone play like that," she whispered. "Not at any of the concerts we've been to." The wealthy woman who had started the whole scene stood stiffly, her cheeks flushed with a deep red that had nothing to do with her wine. She tried to laugh it off, lifting her glass in a mock toast. "Well, I suppose our entertainment budget just doubled," she quipped, forcing a brittle chuckle. But nobody laughed with her this time. Her friends shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting toward the crowd that was still fixated on Jordan. The woman who always commanded attention was suddenly invisible in her own circle, placed by the very man she had mocked. Jordan didn't immediately sit back down. Instead, he returned to his tray, calmly lifting it again, as though the eruption of applause had been nothing but a fleeting distraction. That composure, that humility, only fueled the whispers more. "He's incredible," someone said. "Why is he serving drinks? He should be on stage, not here." "Do you think the organizers knew?" Was the event's host, a broad-shouldered man in his 60s, bustled forward with a look of determination. He was used to orchestrating galas, but he knew when something extraordinary had happened. He intercepted Jordan near the center of the room, placing a hand on his shoulder. "My boy, that was extraordinary," the host said, his booming voice carrying across the murmuring crowd. "Would you do us the honor of one more piece?" Jordan hesitated. He wasn't there as a performer. He was there as staff, to cross. That line felt complicated. But the faces turned toward him weren't mocking anymore. They were expectant, reverent even. He could feel the shift in power, the weight of all those eyes on him, not as a servant, but as someone worth watching. He glanced toward the wealthy woman, who now looked like she wanted to melt into the marble floor. He didn't smirk. He didn't gloat. He simply turned back to the piano and sat down again. This time, the silence was immediate, heavy with anticipation. He chose something softer, more delicate, a piece that floated like silk through the room. His fingers caressed the keys with tenderness, weaving a melody that tugged at hidden corners of the soul. People swayed unconsciously, couples leaned closer together, and even the staff paused in the doorways to listen. Jordan's playing blurred the boundaries between background music and the kind of performance that defined nights forever. The wealthy woman tried again to interject, her voice slightly shrill as she said, "Well, I suppose anyone can learn a few tricks if they practice enough." But the people around her ignored her. Some even shifted away, not wanting to be associated with her pettiness, when the entire room was swept up in brilliance. Her glass trembled slightly in her hand as she realized what was happening. She had tried to make him the butt of a joke, and now she was the one exposed. When Jordan finished the second piece, the applause was even louder. Some guests surged forward, eager to shake his hand. A man with salt and pepper hair introduced himself as the director of a local symphony and pressed a business card into Jordan's palm. "We need to talk," he said earnestly. "Talent like yours can't stay hidden." A woman in a glittering green gown leaned forward, eyes wide. "Do you take students?" "My daughter has been struggling, but if she could just hear someone like you." Jordan accepted the cards and compliments politely, but he didn't let the excitement overwhelm him. He wasn't here to audition. He wasn't here to prove anything. Still, the recognition warmed something deep inside him, a place he had long thought frozen. For years, he had wondered if the world would ever hear his music again. And tonight, by accident, it had. The wealthy woman, desperate to regain some footing, stepped forward with a tight smile. "Well," she said, her tone sharp but falsely. "Sweet, perhaps we should thank me for discovering him tonight. After all, if I hadn't asked, we'd never have known, would we?" She expected chuckles, nods, agreement. But instead, silence fell again. And the crowd's eyes turned toward her not with admiration, but with barely veiled disdain. Someone muttered under their breath, discovered him. She was mocking him. Another voice hissed, she embarrassed herself. Her friends avoided her gaze, pretending suddenly to be deeply interested in their champagne. The humiliation burned hotter than she could bear. She had intended to remind everyone of her social dominance. But instead, she had stripped herself of it completely. Jordan, still calm, offered her nothing, no acknowledgement, no confrontation. That, more than anything, was the final blow. She wasn't worth his energy. His silence spoke louder than any cutting remark could have. He returned to his tray once more, moving through the crowd with the same quiet dignity he had started with. But now every eye followed him with respect, and every whisper carried his name. The rest of the evening unfolded in his shadow. Guests continued to talk about him long after he had returned to serving drinks. Conversations circled not around the charity, nor the wealthy donors, but around the pianist, the host. Sensing the opportunity, even hinted that perhaps next year Jordan would be invited back not as staff, but as the evening's featured entertainment. The idea was met with enthusiastic approval. Meanwhile, the wealthy woman's influence crumbled in real time. She attempted small talk, but people excused themselves quickly, gravitating instead toward those still buzzing about Jordan's performance. Her laughter rang hollow, her smile brittle. For once, she wasn't the center of the room, and she couldn't bear it. She slipped out earlier than planned, her heels clicking sharply against the marble as if trying to punctuate her fading importance. Jordan noticed her departure, but only in passing. His focus was elsewhere on the piano, on the lingering energy in the room, on the strange possibility that maybe, just maybe, this night was the beginning of something. He didn't know yet that videos had been taken, that smartphones had quietly captured every moment of his playing. He didn't know that by morning, those clips would be spreading online, shared by guests who couldn't believe what they had witnessed. He didn't know that the world beyond that ballroom was about to hear his music. All he knew, as he lifted another tray and carried it through the crowd, was that something had shifted. The people who had ignored him now saw him. The ones who had laughed were silent, and the woman who had tried to humiliate him was gone, her arrogance shattered by nothing more than the truth of his talent. And Jordan, the man who had walked into that room invisible, now left it unforgettable. When Jordan walked home that night, the streets felt quieter than usual, though the sound of the piano still lived inside him. His hands tingled as though the music hadn't finished flowing through them yet. He didn't expect anything more to come of it. To him it was just another night where life had played a cruel trick and given him a brief moment with the thing he loved most, only to send him back to carrying trays and blending into the background. He had no idea the moment hadn't ended when the applause did it had only begun. By the time he woke the next morning, the world had already shifted. His phone buzzed relentlessly on the nightstand. At first he thought it was spamming, till he opened one message, then another, then another. Friends he hadn't heard from in years were sending him links, videos, screenshots. Is this you? Bro, you're viral. You were trending on Twitter last night. His stomach tightened as he clicked on one of the links. There it was, shaky phone footage of him sitting at the piano in his waiter's uniform, his fingers flying across the keys, the crowd around him frozen in awe. The caption above the clip read, "They thought he was just the help." Then this happened. Had been shared hundreds of thousands of times already, climbing into the millions by midday. Comments flooded beneath it, people from all over the world marveling at his talent. Who is this guy? This is why you treat everyone with respect. That woman who mocked him must be hiding right now. Someone else wrote, he's better than half the concert pianists I've paid to see. Labels, where are you? Sign this man. Jordan stared at the screen, equal parts stunned and uneasy. The attention was surreal. For years, his music had lived in the shadows, hidden behind survival jobs and long nights of doubt. And now, suddenly, it was everywhere. His inbox filled with invitations, interviews, podcast appearances, offers from talent agents. Musicians reached out with collaborations. Producers dangled contracts. It was overwhelming, but beneath the chaos. He felt a spark reignite. This was what he had dreamed of. Once his music reaching people, moving them, connecting with them beyond walls and prejudice. Meanwhile, the woman who had mocked him was living a nightmare. Her name hadn't been mentioned in the viral videos at first, but she was there in the background, her laugh caught on film, her smirk cleared just before Jordan sat down to play. The internet had a way of finding people, and within hours, she had been identified, comment sections filled with fury and ridicule. She tried to humiliate him. Imagine being her right now, the face of arrogance. She had built her reputation on being untouchable in her social circles. But now she couldn't step outside without whispers following her. Her friends distanced themselves quickly, issuing carefully worded statements about misunderstandings and regrettable moments. Invitations to the kinds of events she lived for dried up overnight. She became a cautionary tale whispered about at gatherings. The woman who mocked a genius and destroyed herself in the process. Jordan, meanwhile, was invited to appear on a morning talk show, sitting under the bright studio lights in a crisp suit someone had loaned him. He felt out of place at first, but when the host asked him to play and the cameras zoomed in on his hands, the nerves disappeared. The music took over. He played not just for the studio audience, but for the millions watching at home. When he finished, the host wiped at his eyes and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, you've just witnessed something extraordinary." That clip went viral too. In the weeks that followed, Jordan's life transformed. He signed with a record label, not the flashy, exploitative kind, but one that had reached out with sincerity, promising to give him full creative control. He recorded his first album, a mix of classical pieces and his own compositions, and it sold out in days. Concert halls that had once felt like unreachable dreams now opened their doors to him. His name appeared on posters and headlines, on the lips of people who spoke his music with reverence. But Jordan never forgot the way. It started how a cruel joke had set the stage. At his first major concert, standing in a hall packed with thousands, he addressed the audience before playing his final piece. "I was told once in a room full of laughter to play something as a joke," he said, his voice steady. "Night changed my life. Not because of the laughter, but because I remembered why I play for moments like this, where music reminds us of our shared humanity." The crowd erupted, not just in applause, but in standing ovation. Back in the circles of wealth and arrogance where it had all begun, whispers about Jordan never faded. The same people who had dismissed him now boasted about having been in the room that night. They conveniently left out the details of the mockery, but they couldn't erase the truth captured on video. The wealthy woman, meanwhile, had become a ghost in those circles. Her Tesla sat unused. Invitations stopped arriving, and when people saw her, they looked away with embarrassment for her, or worse, pity. She had wanted attention. She got it, but not the kind she had craved. Jordan never sought revenge. He didn't need to. The music had spoken for him louder than any confrontation could've. And in the end, it wasn't about her at all. It was about him reclaiming what he had thought he'd lost. About the world finally hearing what he had carried all along. The irony was never lost on him, though. The very moment meant to humiliate him had become the turning point of his life. Without it, he might still have been invisible. But fate has a strange way of flipping the script. One cruel laugh, one smirk. One command to play as something had set the stage for everything that followed. Months later, standing on stage, at Carnegie Hall, the lights dimmed and the crowd hushed. Jordan thought back to that ballroom. He thought of the tray he had set down, the laughter he had ignored, the piano that had waited patiently for him. And when he pressed the first key, the music rose like a tide, sweeping over the audience, carrying them somewhere far beyond judgment or cruelty. When the final note faded and the ovation thundered, Jordan bowed with quiet dignity. He didn't need to gloat. He didn't need to remember her name. The world had already written the ending. She had tried to make him small, but he had filled the world with his sound. And with that, the story was complete, not of humiliation, but of triumph. Not of a joke, but of legacy.